All right, so apologies for that interruption. Again, just to repeat this slide in case it wasn't heard online. What we're talking about tonight is defined as units that are rented for less than 30 days. So that's how we're defining a short-term rental. So the reason we're bringing this draft ordinance in front of you tonight and it's important to note that the state of Arizona preempts or prohibits cities from regulating short-term rentals in a lot of different ways. But last year they passed a bill that allowed cities to create several specific regulations for short-term rentals, including allowing preempted or prohibited from doing that by the state. So really all that cities are allowed to regulate appears in our ordinance that you'll see tonight. So if you would like to see more regulation of short-term rentals, please do reach out to your state representatives because that is really beyond the power of the city right now. So I also just wanted to provide a rough schedule of events so you can get an idea of the timeline that we're looking at. You can see the second line there, we're having this open house tonight. And then we are, in April, we'll be finalizing our rate increase and posting a 60-day fee notice. In June, we'll be working through the ordinance itself and getting council direction on that. And then we're looking to have the ordinance be adopted on June 20th before council's summer break. The effective date of that ordinance will be September 1st. So that means that at that date, the licensing software and system will be a period of time, likely 60 days or so, that short-term rental owners will have to obtain their license and to come into compliance. So you can see it's an extended process and there are a lot of opportunities for public feedback, and this is kind of the first step here tonight. So thank you all for joining. Now at this point, I will turn it over to Anya Wendell, our Senior Assistant City Attorney, and she will walk us through the ordinance itself. Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's great to see so many people here tonight and so many people interested in short-term rentals in Flagstaff. My name is Anya Wendell, and I'm one of the attorneys here for the city. And if I twitch every time that beeps, feel free to twitch with me. So what we have done is follow the state law in preparing a draft ordinance. We also looked at to see what the county is doing. We also looked at what some other cities are doing around the state. We looked at Sedona and Williams and Tempe and Scottsdale. And so, but basically we're all doing the same, which is to switch from a registration system, which we currently have with the city, to a licensing system. They're really not that different, except that with a license, you can revoke the license and will be able to charge a licensing fee. And the state has imposed some new parameters on when a license could be suspended or revoked and who's able to hold a license in the first place. So once this ordinance is adopted, everyone who has or operates a short-term rental will be required to get a license and pay the license fee, whatever it is. We haven't figured it out yet. It can be up to $250. It has to be based upon the city's actual costs of running the program. We don't charge a fee for profit. No fees can be charged for profits. So it'll be whatever we figure out based on our actual costs. So you have to have a separate license for each short-term rental. So if you're one of those people who own like 3 short-term rentals, you'll have to have a license for each one. So each one is regulated separately. And that's consistent with state laws about taxation as well. There's a separate transaction privilege tax license for each business, right? Each business location has its own tax license number. The license, we're planning to have it for a 1-year term. So it will then be renewed. We talked about it internally, and the license will be from whenever you get it, it's valid for a year. Whether you use it or not, that's the year period. We won't be licensing on a calendar year basis. Okay, I see lots of head nods there. So that's the way we're gonna do it, at least currently. Okay, now I get to go to the next slide. Nope, wrong way. Okay, so when you apply for a license, this is not super exciting. You have to provide the address for the short-term rental, the contact information for the owner. They also allow us to require, and we will require a 24-hour emergency point of contact. That's, someone who's designated by the owner to receive calls if there's any problems related to the short-term rental. Bless you. So we'll also ask for the submittal of the transaction privilege tax license number. That's so we can make sure that everybody's paying taxes. And the owner will have to say they're not a registered sex offender, don't have a felony conviction for death, serious injury or use of a deadly weapon in the last 5 years. Oh, thank you. Can you hear me better now? Oh, I'm sorry if you couldn't hear me as well before. So anyway, those are the people that are not entitled to get a license. Will be the registered sex offender, or you have a felony conviction for something that really hurt somebody, or you've used a deadly weapon and there's been a violation in the last 5 years. You'll also, the short-term owner will also have to provide neighborhood notification to all the single-family units nearby, across the street, diagonally across the street, and forget the other direction. Yeah. Anyway, adjacent to, so that's right or left, thank you, in the crowd, directly across and diagonally across. There's no requirement for upstairs right now, but if we may want to address multifamily residential buildings. The state law does do that. It says the city can require notice to residents on the same building floor. So you could require notice on a floor basis. So we'll look into that and see what additional notice we should require for multifamily buildings. And with that notice, you'll have to provide the emergency point of contact. The whole point being is that neighbors ought to be able to know who they can contact if something's going on in that short-term rental that is making too much noise or violating law or doing something that's upsetting people. Okay. This slide just lists all the reasons why the city can deny a license. And that is, you don't provide the information requested, you don't pay the license fee, you provide false information, or again, you're a sex offender, or you've got these felony convictions. Sometimes we have short-term rentals, and I know this will never happen once our ordinance is adopted, but they don't get a license, right? So, but if somebody's operating without a license for whatever reason, then if the city notifies them and says, hey, you need a license, you're advertising, we know you're out there operating, then if they fail to get a license, the owner will have to pay a fine of $1,000 per month. So that's a pretty good stick to get people into compliance with licensing. Okay, this slide is about the neighborhood notification again. See, I need this slide when I was talking earlier, but you'll have to notify all your neighbors and provide the emergency point of contact. Also, the notice is supposed to have the short-term rental license number so that you can contact the city about it. And this separate last bullet here is about advertisements, and our advertisements, we're going to require the short-term rental license number on all advertisements for short-term rentals in Flagstaff. And then state law separately requires the transaction privilege tax license number to be listed on the advertisement. So if you're advertising, those are two things you want to list: the short-term rental license and the state TPT license. Okay. The new state law also allows cities and towns or counties to require a minimum of 500,000 or aggregate liability insurance on the property. And they require, and the state law also allows the city to require the owner of the short-term rental to conduct sex offender background checks on the booking guests. Right now, our draft ordinance does not include those two provisions. That's something that if council wants, we can change direction on that, but we don't currently have those in our draft code. So if there are problems at a short-term rental, the state law does allow the suspension of a license for up to 12 months for what's called verified violations. And a verified violation basically means it's not just like we've issued a citation and said, hey, you're in violation. A verified violation means, hey, we've issued a citation, you're in violation of this code, you've had the opportunity to appeal it, and request a hearing, and then after the hearing, it has been done, a decision is rendered, or if you've gone to court, a court decision has been rendered and is no longer appealable. So a verified violation means you've had all opportunities to appeal it, and it's final. So if there's 3 verified violations within 12 months for code violations, other than aesthetic, solid waste disposal, or parking violations, unless they're a threat to public health and safety, then you could have your license suspended. So basically what they're talking about here is maybe you haven't maintained your emergency point of contact, maybe you haven't, you've had noise violations over and over. Those would be the type things, but not trash or parking. And aesthetic, I really don't know what that is, but it's mentioned in the state law. Or a license could be suspended if there's been something really horrible happen on the property, death, injury, or you've housed a sex offender, or allowed prostitution, or topless dancing, or one of the unlawful uses that would require a permit. I'm not so sure this slide is the best slide. Okay. Then there's also penalties allowed for verified violations of the short-term rental code. It would be $500 for the first violation within 12 months, $1,000 for the second within 12 months, and $3,500 for the third within 12 months. The state law would allow you to charge, bless you, amount of rent that is equal to a penalty that's equal to the amount of rent that you made on the rental. I think this is more applicable like in Paradise Valley or Scottsdale, where they have huge houses, that 20,000 square foot houses that they can rent out for 5,000 a night or something. But we felt like for simplification purposes that it made sense just to have flat fines, 500,000 or 3,500. We didn't want to run around figuring out what the rent was that night to be the penalty. And then we do also have an administrative appeal process within the draft code. The city manager would appoint an independent hearing officer, and by independent we mean that someone who is not involved with, you know, code enforcement or legal issues, or it would need to be somebody who is truly independent, doesn't have like a fixed opinion about the violation or alleged violation. With this, I'll turn it over to Jessica Kittleson. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Kittleson. I'm the customer service manager, and our team oversees the current emergency contact registration system. So if you're currently an owner, you'll receive a notification from us when it's time to register your property. And that same system is what we plan to convert into a license system. So when that happens, which we anticipate to, as Anya said, to be in September, you'll get a notification that you have an open task in your portal. So owners will be able to then log into that task. We have some screenshots available. Sorry, they're a little small. So you'll log into that system, fill out the new license information, upload any documents to that system as required, pay the fee, and then we will review that information that you've submitted, and then you will receive your license. So pretty straightforward, simple, we hope. I'm now going to pass it on to Reggie, who's going to talk about code enforcement.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Reggie Ethelston. I'm the Code Compliance Manager, and my group will be tasked to make sure everyone's in compliance. So it'll be a very big task, but we're not looking to add additional staff at this time. We're a very small group, but I think till we get really deep into it, we'll be able to handle it. So basically what we'll be doing is we'll be working with all the residents as well as the property owners, but we'll also be working with the property managers. So anyone that's involved with the short-term rental will be able to contact us, or we'll be contacting them. Our current system is going to stay online. So we presently have a complaint line and a place for these short-term rentals to register. So that's going to basically stay the same. It'll just be a license that will be involved in the coming months. So that's not going to change. We'll also have the same hotline phone number, which, as you can see, 928-714-7951. So if anyone has a complaint about a short-term rental, you can either lodge a complaint online through the hotline or call the hotline number. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's taking place with this process, you can always go to flagstaff.az.gov/STRL, which is short-term rental license. So, or you can email short-term rental at flagstaffaz.gov, and you can be added to the interested parties email distribution list, or for any other questions, a lot of them will be housed right there. So with that, oh, you'll also be able to scan, the little QR code that'll bring you to it as well. I'm not real familiar with that. I'm not very tech savvy, but I'm sure a lot of you out there are. So, well, with that, we are ready to take questions and any feedback from you community members. So thank you for all showing up tonight, and hopefully working together, we can really address this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reggie. So I think how we'll start is maybe we'll take 3 questions from folks in the audience, then we'll go to 3 questions from folks online, and we'll just kind of go back and forth. So if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll come over. We'll have the relevant staff come up to answer your question. If we can't answer your question tonight, we can get back to you. We can provide more information at a future timeline. So I saw a first question down here, so I'll go to this gentleman.
My question is kind of a comment as well as really for the council members is I'm an avid traveler on short-term rentals, and I love it. I just, my family, it's perfect because we all get to experience having a kitchen and things like that. But I'm also a short-term owner in Flagstaff. In fact, I bought about 6 years ago, and I just want to give you one experience because it's an experience that I think will hopefully resonate with you, in that I was having dinner with my daughters that are 21 and my wife in my backyard, and it's 5:30 in the afternoon. We're having dinner, we're having a bottle of wine, and we're just enjoying ourselves. We're talking like I am right now to you, but it wasn't loud at all. But the lady behind me decided to call the police on me. And so she was complaining to me from across the way that I'm doing something terrible, and I was simply having dinner with my daughters that were home from college. And so what I'd like you to reflect on and think about is that there's a lot of ways. Of course, I think we all have it in ourselves to do the right thing. Okay, everybody wants to do the right thing. In fact, I'm not going to rent my place on Tequila Sunrise weekend because it's a disaster. It's a disaster. But what I will say is that experience that I had really made me think about, gosh, I mean, the police officer actually came to the door at about 8. and said, "I'm sorry, but the lady is," he said, he rented my house before as a short-term rental for his family. And it's an experience that resonated with me and makes me feel like, gosh, how can that possibly be that I'm simply outside having a dinner with my daughters that I get the police called on me? That's a little excessive. And I understand the reason that we have ordinances and things like that, but I was clearly outside of that. And just please hear that.
Thank you. I'll go to this.
Hello. Hey, my HOA has a short-term rental requirement of no less than 6 months. So how does that conflict with the city? Or does it? Oh, thank you. I knew you said.
So your question was, how does the HOA restriction um, interact with this, with the city code? So the HOA restriction on short-term rentals would be a private restriction. So the city won't enforce that, but your HOA could.
Awesome. And my second one was, I wondered what your definition of short-term rental was, and it's less than, what is it, 30 days?
Correct.
So my problem is we could have new people in every single 4 or 5 day weekend forever.
I don't know what your HOA restriction.
No, I'm not,
states.
I'm not talking about that. My backyard neighbor, yes, I'm talking about that whole new neighborhood. But, you know, I mean, that's what that
But
means.
state law says that cities and towns cannot prohibit short-term rentals.
Right, I understand that. I didn't ask that. What I said was, does it mean that this could just be an ongoing 4 or 5 day weekend, every weekend?
Actually, I think it means you could rent it out every single night to somebody different.
Correct. We kind of know. Woo. Okay, who wants the mic now?
Hi, I'm a 35-year Flagstaff. Can you hear me? I'm a 35-year Flagstaff resident. I'm also a full-time realtor, but I'm also a vacation rental property manager. And I've had a lot of experiences, and 99% of them over the last 8 years have been amazing, actually. And for whatever it's worth, having that many properties on a day-to-day basis and the number of issues or damages or noise complaints or anything is infinitesimally small. I mean, I bet I don't have 3 a year with 30 properties. Partly, I think that's because of our level of management. We're a professional management company, and I think there's a lot of variation in the way people manage their properties. But I just want to say that we've had incredible experience, and we have great owners, and we have great management team. I think that makes a lot of difference on the way things are done. My question for the city is, what is the city's process for leveling the playing field about how they're going to get to all these vacation renters? Because I know that it is required to have an existing registration right now, and we have those for all of our properties. But as far as everybody in all 1,800 or 2,000 or however many there are in the city right now, how is the city going to, it reminds me of when, before Airbnb and Vrbo started collecting the sales tax, there was people who registered their vacation rentals. We paid sales tax. Everything was above board. And there was people who were really beating the system in many ways because they weren't charging sales tax. They were renting their places for less, and it was not a level playing field. Well, that's all been avoided now, and we're happy for that. How is the city going to level the playing field, is making sure that all these vacation renter owners are identified and held accountable to have a license?
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question. So our third-party vendor is pretty fantastic and is able to identify the short-term rental properties through their proprietary software. They can actually view the listing and then compare that, and then we can identify the address through that. So our current system is we identify the properties and we send letters to register. and we work through that. Right now, we're at about 80% compliance.
Mm.
So we've been on that system for a little over 2 years, and we're always adding, more and more properties every month. So it's a monthly process for us to reach out to those owners that are not yet identified.
Got it. Thank you. I do have one
And
other
we
question.
also appreciate if there's properties that, you suspect are not licensed, we're happy to look into those as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Could I ask one more question while I?
Absolutely.
Okay, so about these verified violations, what is a verified violation? I mean, does that mean that the police have showed up and there's been a recorded incident, or is it just a neighbor calling and complaining? And again, we don't have an issue with ours, but I'm just curious, what really designates a verified violation?
Sure. A verified violation is not just a complaint. It's not even a citation from Reggie. It's where that complaint has been issued and and the owner has been given the opportunity to appeal it. And then it's gone to a hearing and then there's a final decision and that has not been appealed.
Okay, I hear that, but I'm still a little bit unsure. Like somebody calls the city and says there's something happening. Is somebody from the city actually going to show up in that moment to that property to verify that there's a violation going on? I don't quite understand. Well, yeah, how does that work?
Well, apparently so. Someone will show up.
Because we all know there's many people on many sides of this issue. And if you had a neighbor that just really hated you and what you were doing, right?
Yeah.
You understand how that could really influence somebody's experience
Yeah.
on all sides of that, owner, guest, everything, right?
So if it's a non-emergency complaint, that's what will separate that. We will not be able to get out there immediately.
Right.
First of all, our work hours may not allow us to be there for a complaint at night. That's why PD distinguishes whether it's a non-emergency or an emergency. If it is an emergency, an officer will respond right away. If it's a non-emergency, we might not get to it 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on the severity of the actual violation or complaint, not so much violation.
Right.
Because there are many times we get the complaint and it's not actually a violation. So that's the distinguishment between that.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarity.
All right, Sean, do we have anyone online who'd like to ask a question?
We do indeed. We're going to go with Trish first. So Trish, if you'd like to unmute your speakers, you should be all set.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. I have a couple of them. The first is you kind of answered this a little bit, but what determines the amount of the annual fee? You said that there's no fees for profit. It's going to be based on the cost to run the program. But I guess my question is, will it be adjusted based on the number of licenses issued, or is it just going to be a set fee forever? How will that work?
Thank you for that question. So the factors that the city will be looking at initially in establishing the fee are its current costs, right? So it's costs for its software vendor who's tracking and all of the short-term rental licenses and who's monitoring them and who's saying, oh, hey, here's somebody out there who doesn't have a license, but it's advertising. It's staff time. A lot of Reggie's time spends a lot of time with code compliance on short-term rentals as well as other things, but he'll split out how many hours a month he works on code compliance for short-term rentals, and they'll factor that cost in. It'll be our finance and licensing staff as well who spend time on these. And so, they'll look at all the city costs. Now, and the fee can be evaluated frequently. I mean, we like to keep it set for a while. I'm sure we'll have the same fee at least for a year, but if costs could go down because, as you pointed out, that there could be a whole bunch of new licenses issued, and then with those revenues, that would cover the software costs, because that's kind of a fixed cost, right? That's not going to change too much based upon the number of short-term rental code owners or licenses out there.
Next question, does the emergency contact have to be someone local? Because I live in Texas, but I own property in Flagstaff, and I am my own emergency contact.
So long as you're able to respond to a call from the police in case of an emergency within 60 minutes, either in person or by phone or text, you can be designated as the emergency contact. So you can be in Texas.
And the notification to the letters, is there gonna be a form that we can fill out and send it to the neighbors? And do we have to certify that we've given them notification?
The city has not prepared like a standard form of notice. We were intending or currently thinking of providing like 3 or 4 sample forms and letting you figure out what notice you want to send. So long as you meet the statutory requirements, it should be good. As part of the license application, we're asking you to attest that you've complied with the neighbor notification requirements. I should point out that if your emergency point of contact changes or some other pertinent information changes, that a new neighborhood notice needs to be sent out so that the neighbors always have the current who they can call.
And my last quick question is, will the licensing application, be annual, or are we gonna have to pay in September and then pay again in January? Will it be like a rolling? So like whenever all these ordinances go into effect in September, we're gonna apply and have to pay whatever the fee is, and then come January, we're gonna have to pay the fee again.
The license will be rolling. So if you apply and get your license up to September, it will be good until the following September.
Thank you very
You
much.
apply, yeah, if you apply in November, it'll be good until the following November. So that's what's meant by rolling.
Okay, and then we have, it's under the screen name Roberts. If you can unmute yourself and please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Megan. I am a property owner in Flagstaff, and I live in Tempe, and I have a property management up there. And I have 2 questions. So the first is regarding, is similar, kind of piggybacking off of Trish's question. Would a mailed letter suffice to notify neighbors? Like, we don't know the name of the neighbors, just a 2 current resident. Would that be sufficient? And then when the houses are bought and sold, will that notice have to be renewed to new neighbors, or will buyers be notified of adjacent properties that are short-term rentals?
You have a very active mind.
Thank you. I have a very active neighbor.
So the state law does not require you to send a new notice when your neighbor changes. And I think that would be pretty funny though, particularly if you have another short-term rental next door, right? You have to send a new notice every day. But yeah, you're only required to send it to your neighbor. And once you send it, you're good until your emergency point of contact changes or something changes that requires additional notice. And there's nothing in the state law that says you need to send it to the correct name of the neighbor or the name of the neighbor on record. It just says to the neighbor.
Okay. Thanks. And then my other question is more for protection of homeowners against neighbors who are unhappy with either the fact that it is a short-term rental or just unhappy with current tenants. How is the city then going to deal with possible fake, I'm sorry, just I wrote down my question. Let me just read it. What recourse can the city take on behalf of an owner in defense of a harassing neighbor? And what is the verification that takes place for complaints that leads to violations? And I think Reggie touched on this, and I've actually been in contact with Reggie regarding this.
At this point, I'll answer part of your question. At this point, the city's not planning to get or issue any injunctions against neighbors who are harassing you. But there are statutes that do allow anyone to get an injunction against harassment under, through the court system.
Hi, Megan.
Hi, Reggie.
Yeah, as we had spoken before, we're very savvy as to determine whether it's just a complaint just to harass or whether it's something that's actually valid. We do have to check out anything that we do get um, uh, told, so to speak. But once we do check it out, again, it's not always valid. So there's no recourse that we have to the complainant other than the fact that the more they complain, the less
Right.
sense of emergency that we'll show. So,
Sure.
um,
Got it.
we definitely know that there's some that just don't like the fact that it is a short-term rental and they call for every little thing. Again, we do check it out, but we are pretty savvy as to knowing whether it's actually valid or not.
Sure. Yeah. My problem with any kind of injunction or litigation is that I can put something against myself, but there's no protection for my tenants or my business. And I was wondering if there's anything that City of Flagstaff is going to include as a part of this licensure.
That's why we're having this feedback section. So maybe that's something we can look at as we move forward.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, and next up we have John Kay. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I think by John Caden and John Koborowski, that should be me.
You're good, John.
Okay. So one of the big questions I have is strictly by the definition of a short-term rental, there are housing projects that would fall into that category. Hotels, motels, shelters, halfway houses. And I can, go on and on if I keep thinking about the other product types that all fall in that area. Are they going to be equally required to have the same requirements that we have on short-term rentals since they are short-term rentals?
So your question is if a halfway house or homeless shelter needs a short-term rental license?
It doesn't have to be a homeless shelter, but a shelter, a halfway house, hotels, motels, anything that's leasing residential space for less than 30 days.
Well, the short-term rental code applies to single-family units in residential zones. So it's really not, it wouldn't encompass hotels, and it wouldn't necessarily encompass halfway houses either. We have separate zoning provisions related to certain types of group homes that house people who are disabled. And I don't know if Dan Folk is on the line. He's our community development director, but he would probably be the best person to answer any questions about our zoning restrictions related to those types of uses.
Okay, I read your definition as to what a short-term rental is, and it didn't say anything about a zoning category. It simply said units rented for less than 30 days. So I was just being, I was looking at that saying, well, that really grabs a lot of other categories, but we could shelf that for a minute. The other question I have is, or comment I have to make is I did some quick research. There's 1,236 registered short-term rentals in Flagstaff that are larger than 1 bedroom. And I could tell you personally, as a part-time resident in Flagstaff and an active user of short-term rentals and an owner of a short-term rental, that it's a big thing for Flagstaff to have units that are larger than what I call a hotel room available. Over 1,000 of those units, so well over 80% of those units are larger than 1 bedroom, and that serves a certain need. I heard a gentleman before talking about having a couple young daughters. When I travel, and I'm actually in Colorado right now, staying in a short-term rental. When I travel, I can't always take or spend the money to rent 2 or 3 hotel rooms. It always works out better for me to rent one larger short-term rental. So I think it's a very integral part of both the tax base on rentals, the people spending money in restaurants, people spending money at Snow Bowl, and all the other things. So I'm I'm very much in favor of this, and I totally understand the regulation and some controls, and I support that to a limited degree, as long as we allow people to run their businesses that they have to. But yeah, my biggest concern is I just want to make sure we understand that the economic impact that those 1,236 registered on the platforms, Airbnb and such, units have on the city of Flagstaff. I think it's a tremendous impact on that city. And that was my only comment.
Thank you. A short-term rental as defined in our state law and our city code is a single family or 1 to 4 family house or dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit, or any unit or group of units in a condominium or cooperative that is also a transient public lodging establishment. So, and I don't know, Dan, we've got Dan here. You might as well answer the questions about the other kinds of uses under our zoning code.
Hi, good evening. This is Dan Folk. I'm the Community Development Director. If there's a question about zoning, I'm going to definitely answer. So it will not be a defined use. So basically, as Anya said, the uses will be, the uses don't change. The uses are single family, multifamily, hotel. We have uses like congregate care facilities, other types of residential uses that are defined in the code. And so the short-term rental really does it. The intent is it's going to apply to these single family, maybe some multifamily units. And it's not so we're not regulating it as a use. We're requiring a license through the business office. Hopefully that helps. And so the intent is not to require like congregate care living or other nightly facilities to necessarily be a short-term rental. It could be some other kind of residential facility. Yeah.
And if it's one facility, for example, one halfway house, they don't have to per se register all 10 units they have there. It would just be under the one address, because I heard some reference to the similarity to the transient tax license. It's the same thing. It's one address, one license.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain protected residential uses like halfway houses, sober houses, other things that are protected uses. And yeah, they're not going to be subject to this license, in my opinion, but I'm not the city attorney.
Okay, yeah, but the question was more of if it's a 10 room facility, let's not even call it a halfway house, let's call it a 10 room apart or 10 house apartment building, a 10 unit apartment building that rents out on short term. I would assume they only need to have one license for the entire address if it's being run and managed by one company and under one address.
I don't think
I'm going
we're
to defer that
intending
one back to Anya.
Yeah, we're not intending to license group care homes or, halfway houses under our short-term rental code. Our short-term rental code is really to regulate the use of single-family homes in residential neighborhoods or condominiums in residential developments. And those are not the places, that's really for transient lodging. Our group care homes are allowed in residential zones, but they have a state license from the Arizona Department of Health Services, and they're permitted under our zoning ordinances. So they have a completely different licensing system.
Yeah, but my question was still, if it's a 10 unit apartment building, let's not call it any kind of special use other than it's a strictly an apartment building that someone runs as a short-term rental, that would be required to have, I'm assuming by the definitions here, one license, as it's one address. There wouldn't have to be 10 separate licenses for all the units if they're all owned by the same entity and managed and run by the same company.
Let's take this under advisement and get back to you on that. And if
okay,
you could,
I appreciate that.
If you could email our contact person, Sarah Langley, that would be good.
Thank you. Yeah, feel
Okay,
free to email
thank you.
short-term rental at flagstaff.az.gov. All right, so let's bring it back to this audience. We have about 15 more minutes. I'll take this.
So my question, my question is regarding property managers. And what do you do when you have a property manager that is bullying you and the HOA is bullying you at the same time? So, and I have a text on file. and I have a text on file proving my point. Since they're your go-to contact, and they don't want to hear it. You know, they don't want to have anything to do with what you're just asking a simple question about. And so who do you go to then?
Reggie Eccleston has offered to take your calls.
Yeah, if you do have a complaint, but you feel that you've tried to not involve us by talking to the property manager or owner, but you feel like they're not listening or they're bullying you or they continue on, then we would definitely be the ones to call to take over and do the due diligence for you.
Thank you. I see a hand in the back that's been up for a while, so let me walk back here.
Hello. So I heard that that the state gave you guys the authority to do this, but nowhere in your presentation have you guys said that there's an actual problem. And you guys are talking about siphoning off, upwards of $400,000 a year. So my first question is this a big problem? Are we having complaint after complaint after complaint? Because in the neighborhood I live in, the cops do come, but it's for long-term rentals, not short-term. So I feel like you guys are actively discriminating against the new cool short-term when in my neighborhood, the nicest houses in the neighborhood are short-term rentals. They're taken care of. So is there an active problem? Because no, you guys haven't mentioned, like, are we having thousands of complaints a year or?
Thank you for that comment. We do receive a lot of complaints about short-term rentals, and Reggie can speak to that. We also have 20%, it sounds like, of short-term rentals out there operating without a license, possibly without paying, or registration, possibly without paying local transaction privilege tax. So it is a revenue issue for us. And those would be a couple of the things we could point to.
Okay. Do you guys, I'm sure you guys have statistics, do you guys have more officer-related calls to long-term or short-term rentals? Do you guys?
We have our chief police, Dan Musselman, here. I think you're on the hot seat now, but but the police don't always know, the status, the ownership of the unit.
You're 100% right. We go to all calls, but we don't know if they're the owners or a short-term rental, and we have a lot of student housing properties, so that'd be a great capstone project for some college student here in town if they want to look into it. We do get complaints from a lot of short-term rentals, and there are people out there that just don't like rentals. But our officers try and handle it reasonably. Everything's on body camera. We don't always issue citations. Sometimes majority of the times we like to work it out, but sometimes we do issue citations, and sometimes the people just leave, and sometimes the property management companies just get screamed at by neighbors.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, it just seems like there's a lot of questions going towards short term, but I live in Lower Greenlaw, and the neighborhood's never been nicer because there's a whole lot of them. And typically we have more problems with the long-term rentals in that neighborhood than we do with the short-term. So you guys are just making it harder for the neighborhoods to.
Thank you, sir. I did see one more question from this gentleman here, and then we'll switch back online.
I have three. I have 3 short-term rentals that border my property. Who is liable for the trash that's left behind on your side, on my side of the fence? The guest is gone, and they leave the trash on my side of the fence, and I can tell you some of it's not real pleasant. You don't want your grandkids picking it up. Other incident I have is criminal damage. There was an incident at one of the short-term rentals where they came in with air guns and were shooting things up. and they shot out some windows in my house. Officer showed up, told them to stop. They didn't know it was against the law. Who do I go after? The tenant that was there or the owner of the short-term rental? Cost me money to pick it up, cost me time to pick it up. And then there's a trespass that occurs. And they come over your fence at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whenever it may be. But when you find out about it, they're gone. Who's liable?
Well, if you have an incident underway, you can certainly call the police or the code compliance and they can try to address it. But you're right, it does become more difficult to do anything when the perpetrator is perhaps not even known. I don't want to get started talking about trash because I don't like litter and I see it everywhere. But
Well, I can say that if there is some type of violation of some sort, it always reverts back to the property owner. If the resident or the tenants are not available, are not there, it will always revert back to the property owner. That would be your choice. Small claims, civil matter, private property. Yeah. So.
For the owner of the property, you don't put him out of business. He stays there. The property continues. The damage continues to occur.
So these are the types of issues that we'll be addressing moving forward because we don't have that answer yet.
All right, we've had 3 questions from in person, so let's go back to online. Thank you.
All right, we have Jay up next. If you want to unmute yourself and go on ahead.
Me?
Yep.
Sweet. Hey, my name is Jay. I live in Flagstaff for the last 9 years. And just more of comment questions. I don't need any answers. But the one thing that keeps on circling is, well, to go back to like Tricia and the lady after is, I think, part of registration is just letting your neighbors know that you are running a business out of your house. And the more communication, the more point of contacts available as possible for whether that's a new neighbor moving in, the better. So back to that, though the state doesn't require it, what does Flagstaff require? We are our own community. Does it say you can't require this? But I think it is important to let as many people know as possible that you're running a business out of your house, because you need to be accountable. Back to that gentleman having airsoft guns rifled off at his house. There needs to be point of contacts, whether you're a new neighbor that wasn't notified during the initial registration, you still need to be able to call that person in Texas and be like, hey, I've got some people shooting up my property right now with airsoft guns. You need to respond right now. So I think the more communication, the better. Again, does Flagstaff require this? Does the state require it? Probably not, like you said, but can we require it? And it sounds like yes. So, there are some things that I think that need to be heavier regulated. Transaction privilege tax, for one, as you mentioned, is huge. Obviously, if you can capture all of that, it's huge. So enforcing, is the $1,000 punishment per month, can that be higher? Can Flagstaff make that higher? Why not, right? Like if you're running out of code, why not make it higher? They're making a lot of money on these things. Make sure they are in code, capture that money. As far as the $500, $1,500, $3,500 fines for first, second, third, if those can be higher, why not make them higher? It's just one of those things that we have thousands. I think I mentioned we have 1,200 active users, and it's one of those things that you go to like freaking country club neighborhood, and it's just every other house is an Airbnb. Great community, guys. So any way we can enforce higher, penalties to make property owners liable for incidents of trash, incidents of sound, incidents of firing off, BB guns. It's just, any way we can do that, though the state requires it or not, why can't Flagstaff require it? This is our community. These are our people living in this. These are your community members being affected. And so why wouldn't we enforce higher regulation on that and maximize capital returns? That's all.
Thank you, Jay. We now have Jennifer L. online. If you'd like to unmute yourself. Jennifer L. one more time. All right, we'll come back to Jennifer. How about Amy?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. I have more, my question was answered, so I just have a comment. I would just like to see the city use all the tools that the state has offered and not cherry pick any of these regulations that maybe, I heard someone say, well, we don't want to have to run around and, necessarily capture all this information. Use that TPT money to run around and capture all that information. I would like every tool that the state has provided as an option to be used against issues that are coming up with vacation rentals. And I also just wanted to second what Jay said about the lack of community and the lack of respect for neighbors, that, just because a house looks nicer doesn't mean it's pleasant to live next to. And these strangers coming from out of town, I don't want to go confront them about an issue. I'm not comfortable knocking on the door of a house filled with strangers on vacation. I would absolutely go speak to my neighbor. If the property manager that was assigned to that vacation rental was responsive, I would absolutely go talk to that person if it's someone that lives here in town. But when they're not responsive and it's a house full of strangers, I'm not going to go talk to them in person because there is no sense of community there. I'm only going to report this through channels that have been made available to us. And then I would also like to know from Reggie, for some of these violations that don't necessarily rise to the level that the state will count as a reason to revoke a license, what are our recourses for constant trash, for constant noise, for constant lights being left on, for cars parked on the street? Like what are our options when these aren't necessarily things the state says will have an impact on the license? Thank you.
Okay, and then we are going to go to Jason online.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jason. Go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to comment on the current proposals. My name is Jason Conklin. I'm a 50-year resident of Flagstaff, born and raised. I'm also a landlord and also own several properties and manage them. All that being said, I'd be surprised to hear I would like to applaud the city council and the elected officials in the city of Flagstaff for what they are doing. I think that it's necessary. I think that it is in good faith. And I think that the residents of Flagstaff will benefit greatly from the proposals. I have always chosen not to participate in short-term rentals. Everything I own is what you would consider a long-term rental. And I wanted to let you know why I've made that decision. Short-term rentals do not promote harmony within the community. As it's been vocalized tonight, we've had owners of STRs mention their neighbors, mention that they do not know the names of their neighbors. And that's just a small example of the community that short-term rentals creates. Harmony. So because of that, I've never participated and don't plan on participating in the future. or have been impacted by short-term rentals. So I would like to encourage the city of Flagstaff, as one of the caller called it, do not cherry pick this. Please, anything you can enforce it, and please enforce trash and parking, which are two big issues with short-term rentals. And unfortunately, I don't feel it's being addressed to the degree that it should be. All that being said, thank you very much for your time and consideration, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Well, I know there are a lot of folks in attendance tonight who have questions. Unfortunately, we are not going to be able to answer all those questions tonight. I would like to remind everyone that this is the first step of the process. We'll be back in front of council in May. You're welcome to attend that meeting as well. I also wanted to note, if you have a specific question about how the ordinance will work, please email shorttermrental@flagstaffaz.gov. If you have more of an opinion or you'd like to share your thoughts on the ordinance, please email council@flagstaffaz.gov. That goes to our entire city council so that they can see and read your opinion before they make a decision on this matter. So thank you very much. Again, please feel free to check out our website, send us an email if you'd like to be on our distribution list. Staff will also stick around for a few minutes if you'd like to ask us any questions directly. So thank you all.